Hi, and welcome to the Restless Reader's second favorite quotes video. The quotes I'm going over today are a little bit all over the place, but I think you'll like some of them. The first one is from one of the luminaries of science fiction, Philip K. Dick. This comes from a story called Exhibit Piece. People in dreams are always secure until the dreamer wakes. It's been over a decade since I read the story, so I don't exactly remember the context of the quote. However, the Wikipedia page on the story says that it explores the concept of shifting realities, which is one of Philip K. Dick's ever-present themes. I think if he were around today, he'd probably be writing stories about AI and the way our reality is shaped for good and bad thanks to the internet. Philip K. Dick would probably latch onto the "are we in a simulation" debate, and this quote would fit right in with that. What happens to people if the simulation is paused or just dropped altogether? What state will they be in when the simulation is restarted? Are they truly born, and do they ever truly die? Can the simulation be hacked from the inside? I'm sure Philip K. Dick would have a field day with these questions, and he probably would have written volumes of stories on them. I read a lot of comics in my 20s and 30s, and the next quote is from one such book called Preacher, which was written by award-winning author Garth Ennis. There's a character named Johnny Lee Wombat that wanted to be an astronaut his whole life. Unfortunately, he got kicked out of NASA the day after they selected him, and he's a little bitter about it. In issue 39, he says the following: "See, you got to remember, man, it doesn't matter who you are or how good you got things. Sooner or later, shit goes wrong for everybody. Sooner or later, there comes a time when all you want to do is shout 'fuck you' to the world." There's really no subtext here. Life will mess with everyone, no matter how good they have it. Employed or not, happy or unhappy, poor or rich, doesn't matter. Sometimes it'll be so bad you just want to shout at the world and tell it exactly how you feel about the way it's treating you. Next up is a series of quotes from cranky comedian Lewis Black's book, Nothing's Sacred. The first quote was actually him quoting his mother, Jeanette. She said, "Family is a wonderful thing, but ultimately it's what makes any real change impossible. We would all be compromised into oblivion." I think she was saying that family is the best support structure you can have, but she's also saying that your family can make it impossible to change yourself because they're a support structure that's often firmly set on the current you, the one they're familiar with. They'll resist your change because they don't want to adjust themselves. This next quote is interesting because you have to think about comedians you've seen, maybe even about specific jokes, to understand what Lewis is conveying here. He said, "Humor is how we find comfort in the totally illogical, for it is the bridge back to the logical." When comedians write jokes, they take illogical things and look at them from many angles that most people don't consider. Because of that, when we hear the jokes, we're often led to an enlightening truth, which is like the comedian taking us across a bridge that helps us get over a valley in our viewpoint. At least that's how I interpret this anyway. I think the third quote from Nothing Sacred relates to 9/11 and some of the lessons we can take from that. He said, "I learned 3 lessons from that horrifically sad event. First, there is only today. Tomorrow is an afterthought. Second, your dream is what really counts, so always pursue it with a vengeance. And third, God can be a real prick sometimes." This is another "what you read is what you get" quote. 9/11 showed many people that you just never know when your number's going to be up. And sadly, it was up for a lot of people that day. Because of this, your dream should probably be the one thing that you work for harder than anything else in your life. The last bit shows Lewis being pissed at God for allowing a few men to kill so many people. The final Lewis Black quote I have here, it relates to the mystical they, as in they said. Who are they? It's tough to say. It may change from day to day, but there is a they, and they are so powerful they really don't give a shit what we think anymore. They say a lot of things, don't they? Are they always right? No, they're often wrong. Did they really say that? Maybe, maybe not. Probably 25 to 50% of the things they said were made up on the spot and may or may not be logical extensions of the speaker's own experiences. I mean, I just made up that 25 to 50% number myself. This quote is right about one thing. The they that says the things that get repeated the most are usually powerful enough that they don't care how you take it or even how it affects your life. At least that's what they tell me anyway. The next quote comes from a book by Tim Powers. The book is called 3 Days to Never and is one of those secret histories that Powers likes to write. The book itself is pretty good, and I don't typically reread many books, but I've read 3 Days to Never twice. And here's the quote: "Every plan is a basis for change." Now, many people do a lot of things spontaneously or with little planning because they think planning limits what they can do. This may not be correct unless you're dealing with a specific personality type that just can't roll with the changes. I know someone exactly like that. This quote is saying that every plan is a guideline for progress and should be changed if following the plan limits or stops that progress. Some people are incapable of planning, others are incapable of changing once a plan is in place. A better place to be is in the middle between these two extremes. This is similar to the military saying no battle plan ever survives contact with the enemy. It's basically a version of that. The next quote comes from the comic book Star Wars Tales, issue 24, and it's this: "Men are not driven by altruism. Deep down, there are always agendas." The cynical quote tells you the character doesn't trust anyone that claims to be helping because it's the right thing to do. I'm not sure I believe the idea. I think plenty of people do good things and help others simply because maybe they're the only ones there that can help, maybe because they like to help. I don't know. However, it may be possible to argue it either way. For example, plenty of videos show people helping dig through rubble after a disaster or a bombing during a war. This appears altruistic, and it probably is. However, a cynic might argue that the helpers are there because the faster everyone is found, the faster the work to get their city back to normal can begin, and the sooner they can get back to living the life that they had before the event. Very cynical. If you've ever watched the sitcom Friends, you might have seen the episode where Phoebe tries to be altruistic, but Joey keeps telling her she's not altruistic because her actions make her feel good, and that may be the deeper motivation that she has. I think Joey would agree with the quote I'm quoting here. The next quote is from Star Trek: The Eugenics Wars, Volume 1 by Greg Cox. This is one of my favorite media tie-in novels because it focuses on Gary Seven, who is an underused character from Star Trek, the original series, and it talks about his influence and observations of Khan Noonien Singh before Khan's Supermen were kicked off Earth. And yes, I know the Star Trek episode Assignment Earth had hopes of spinning off to a new show, but it didn't happen. This book is similar to A Secret History because Cox used some real-world events in the story itself. In the novel, Gary Seven tells Khan, "You cannot build Utopia on a foundation of bloodshed and torture." This quote kind of goes along with the last one in a much darker way. It may look altruistic to want a utopia for everyone. However, any true leader in the free world knows most people won't like living in a utopia if inhuman things are being done to make that utopia a reality. Until generations pass and the true history of the utopia's birth is completely forgotten by all but the oldest people, many will live with it but have uneasy feelings about their society somewhere in their minds. For the next quote, we're going back to Star Wars. It comes from a story called The Tale of Nomi Sunrider, in which the Jedi Master Thrawn tells Nomi that no one wants enemies, but enemies can be useful. They force us to reach beyond ourselves, to find courage. It's true that life would be much easier if we never had enemies. A lot of people see enemies where there are none. Others have genuine enemies that drive them to do something important or worthwhile to defeat their enemy. The point is that enemies can be a driving force if they're viewed in the right way. Tesla and Edison were enemies, and it led to better methods to harness electricity in cities way back in the 1800s. Competing companies are essentially enemies. This relationship sometimes leads to improved products and scientific breakthroughs as those companies try to reach beyond themselves to improve current products or create new ones. In day-to-day life, it's better not to have enemies, but if you think you do have enemies, make sure you put the energy you'd focus on them into something more worthwhile. Now we're back to the Eugenics Wars, but volume 2 this time. And it's Khan telling Gary Seven that to conquer without risk is to triumph without glory. In other words, if it's too easy, there's no feeling of accomplishment. I can give you a real life example of this. When I was in the Air Force back in my 20s, a friend of mine back home was getting married, and I had about 6 months to get ready for it. I lifted a lot of weights back then, and I decided that I wanted to be in such good shape that all the bridesmaids would find me attractive. I was in good shape when I went to the wedding, and though not every bridesmaid found me attractive, one of them definitely did, but it was kind of a turnoff. and I wasn't interested in her because it's almost like there was no challenge there. Um, yeah, so I didn't try to get with her or anything. So basically, if you're trying to conquer something, make sure that it isn't completely easy or too easy that the accomplishment just feels like a footnote to you. The last couple quotes are a little different from those before. The first comes from a Jon Stewart essay called The Devil and William Gates, which was in a collection of satirical essays called Naked Pictures of Funny People. And he said, "No time moves as quickly as that of the condemned." I don't remember the context of this quote, but reading it now, I see it as relating to people that know something is coming to an end, not necessarily someone who is literally condemned. Here are a couple of examples. I love playing ice hockey, and the last couple minutes of a game usually feel like they go by in the blink of an eye, much faster than the beginning of the game. I'm condemned to want the game to go on, but it won't. Another example. A book you really enjoy pulls you in and moves quicker than other books you read, especially near the end. You're condemned to feel like you read it faster because you liked it so much and it's just over that much sooner. Time feels like it moved too quickly. The final quote in this video is from a story called The Waters of Meribah by British author Tony Ballantyne. It can be found in Inner Zone 189 if you can find a copy of it, or in David Hartwell's Best SF Volume 9. And here it is. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven. This is a common theme in some Living a Better Life videos that you see on YouTube. Essentially, it's saying your attitude toward everything matters. If you think a job is going to suck and you go at it without those thoughts, it will probably suck. If you think it might be a good experience, but it still sucks, it might suck a little less just because you went into it feeling more positive about it. Of course, there are people that do jobs you probably don't want to do in 1,000 lifetimes, and they love it. I'm thinking of accounting here. I just can't imagine loving accounting in any way, shape, or form, but there are accountants out there that do love it. So heaven and hell are what you make of whatever you're involved in at the moment. Try to remember that the next time someone asks you to do something that you don't want to do. So there you go. That's more of my favorite quotes. If you have any favorites from books, movies, or wherever, please leave them in the comments and say where they came from. Until next time, try finding something profound in the things that you read. Bye.